All right, everybody. So every week, definitely for sure. I mean, all of us, we look forward to having these, valuable conversations. I mean, can you believe it? It's another week whereby we're able to look into all of these various articles. I mean, issues dealing with the various issues that are affecting the cybersecurity space, the organizations, our businesses, and for sure, we definitely have to be on the cutting edge in terms of staying ahead of our game, being able to look at the issues that are actually affecting the organizations, and also gaining necessary um, knowledge, understanding of what is really happening, so that we are able to address these various challenges that are faced by the various organizations. And for sure, guys, I definitely we are hoping to all your questions. I mean, be open to share your views. With us. So if you're looking on screen, then for sure we'll be looking at a very interesting article. A recent article is the Yum Brands, and many of you might be familiar with the Yum Brands. So we'll be discussing a recent article that sheds light on a significant cybersecurity incident faced by Yum Brands, and that's a global fast food operator known for its popular brands, such as KFC, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, and Habit Burger Grill. And to share various insights from a cybersecurity analytical perspective, because that was one of our main aims, to look at these articles from a cybersecurity perspective, to gain all the insight, the details from this. We have Paul, we have Omar, and also we have Jonathan joining us. So, guys, thanks for taking the time as usual. Appreciate it from your busy schedule, no doubt, to add your various, value insights into these conversations. All right. So, guys, one of the things that we need is that as we look further into the document, then I definitely for you to give your perspectives on this article. I mean, as was mentioned, this is an article that was an incident that actually happened recently, as far back as, oh, let me quickly just clear the screen. Okay, so there we have it. So the Taco Bell KFC operator is facing litigations after some person's personal data of company employee was stolen in the attack. So, Paul, would you like to give us further insights into pretty much maybe the background of this particular article?
Yeah, so the first thing that I wanted to point out is from an incident response and cyber attack, and if it's legally determined a breach perspective, is if you notice, the notice came out in January of 2023, and assuming probably 60 to 90 days prior is when the actual attack was discovered and they were dealing with it. So you know, first and foremost, the a cyber attack is just not a one time, one day event. This is, now we are in the month of May, so this is several months of Yum Brands having to deal with this issue. One of the things that stood out to me, and as our conversation goes on, I can give an actual story similar to this, but one thing that we tend to not spend a lot of time on is our employee data. When we talk about data security and data breaches and things of that nature, we really focus in on the customer data that has been compromised and taken advantage of, which is important. It's very important, but we should also have our employees' data in high regard, and if not high regard, because they are our employees. They are people that we depend on to have the business run, and it's a this isn't a Yum Brands, or if it happens to you, it's not a knock, but it's just a natural subset of what happens from here. Is that it's a breakdown of trust between employee and employer when something like this happens. and people's minds will start to raise to say, well, you don't care about my data and things of that nature. But this is not a zeros and ones thing for me. This is a trust thing between employee and employers. And yeah, class action lawsuit, and maybe people will get money and they're doing free credit monitoring for them, and that's great. But there's a tremendous amount of trust that needs to be gained back between employee and employee relationship.
Okay, great, sure. Um, Paul, sorry, Chris or Jonathan.
Jonathan, do you want to go or do you want me to jump in?
Yeah,
Are you
I'll go
there?
ahead.
Go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah, kind of like what Paul was saying. The one big thing that I took away from this article is how much these employees trusted, like the corporate officers, the corporate employees, to really take care of their data. Most of the time, a lot of these employees that probably were affected are probably ones who are minimum wage, who don't really have that much connection to the internet while at work. Maybe they come in and they just punch in on the whatever computer system that they have for tracking their hours. But outside of that, they're probably not really getting on the internet. They're busy serving the people who are coming in for the food orders and everything. So there's a huge trust that these employees have to have in the officers, in the cyber teams that are controlling and should be protecting their data, right? It's one thing for say those professionals who were on a computer daily, right? Yes, we take a lot of risk ourselves, but these type of individuals, these type of employees, they don't have that ability. They're not on it often. So that level of trust that they should have, and the level of guarantee that the corporate offices should be giving should be a lot higher to make sure that the employees' data are being safe. Because a lot of times, some of them might not even know how to have a good cybersecurity hygiene.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a valid point.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was saying that's a very valid point. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
No, I agree with with everything that's been said so far, but I always boil it down to the four factors, right? The four R's when it comes to these types of events, or the ransomware attack in this case, and Yum brand. You have your reputational risk, right? That includes employee privacy concerns, right? I think Paul alluded to that or talked about that to a certain extent. You have the impact on the business, which would be more around your resilience, right? So what does this mean? The article basically highlights that Yum is facing a class action lawsuit, right, in both the federal and state courts. Well, that doesn't work very well for your reputation or your ability to focus on, you know, on the necessary things to make money. The other one, so I've talked about, so there's the risks involved are uh, the revenue impact, the reputational impact, the resilience, right, and then the regulatory. All of those are things that Yum Brand now has to shift their focus from and shift their focus, put their focus on, and stop thinking about how they can generate more revenue, keep employees happy, right, and even acquire new talent, right, or go into new markets. So all of those things are very critical. The other thing I think is it's really important to watch, right? Obviously, we're doing Monday morning quarterback, and so yeah, we know everything, and hindsight is 2020. But it'll be interesting to see how Yum Brands responds to this, right? Response to the attack, right? They locked down their systems, right? They've involved law enforcement. They're conducting forensics and things like that. But it's also important to emphasize that you know, a prompt and comprehensive response to cybersecurity incidents to mitigate these types of damage, right? Vulnerabilities and prevent future attack is also critical. Uh, Two other points, and then I'll go back on mute. One, the next point is the ability to business continuity, right? And customer trust. Those again, resilience and reputation. what will customers do after that? Customers tend to have a very short attention span, so more likely than not, in a couple of weeks, um, they'll be back to where they were pre-breach. And then the final thing I think we should think about, or at least spend some time talking about, is does this have industry-wide implications, right? The article focuses on Yum Brands, but what are the broader implications in terms of cybersecurity for the food and hospitality industry, right? This, I think, this breach or this event or this incident should start sparking conversations around, vulnerabilities and how organization respond to these types of events, and what have they learned, and how can they make themselves more resilient.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
yeah, go ahead, Paul.
I was gonna just say, uh, Umar, your comment about the response is so key because so many times in our industry we like to point fingers when an attack happens, and we act like we're holier than God Himself in these situations. And oh, you should have did this and you didn't do that, and then vendors come out and they say, well, if they had our product, it wouldn't have happened, and that's garbage. Like that's total garbage. Um, but I think back to when Zoom experienced their massive cyber attack, and that to me is a beacon of how you respond to an attack. The CEO got ahead of it within 24 hours, a note of apology, a statement of we are going to better, and here's how we're going to do better. We are allocating funds to ensure our defenses and our resiliency. We are allocating resources to do that. And if a Zoom cyber attack, especially at the time that it happened, right, kind of smack dab in the middle of lockdown, could have been a PR nightmare for them. But with them getting ahead of it and taking care of it, it really helped them out. There's no such thing as 100% secure. These things are bound to happen, but it's how do we respond and how do we move forward. That's the true thing that you are accountable for in this position. So that was a great point, a really good point.
Yeah, sure. And I think one of the things that's, I mean, all of you have actually mentioned so far is, as you have mentioned, Paul, there's no such thing as, well, once there's functionality and you require functionality, then you cannot have 100% security. There has to be some amount of risk associated with the level of exposure that we have in terms of conducting our various operations. So one of the things that actually captivated me from this article is the level of preparedness based on what I'm seeing, as Chris had mentioned earlier, in terms of young brands, their responsiveness to the situation itself. I mean, to the attack. I mean, by initiating their forensics. I mean, the investigation process. I mean, locking down the systems, engaging digital forensics, the necessary expertise, notifying the federal law enforcement agencies. So immediately I recognized that they had a plan, they had a strategy, they had a process in place to say that um, it's almost like anticipating. You do not want these things to happen, but have that anticipation, that level of preparedness is very important regardless of the nature of your, I mean, operations. So yeah, very
Yeah, no,
important.
I think it's and there are many different. I love that point because it's critical, right? They say, I heard someone said once, the worst time, don't go to a gunfight with an empty gun, or don't load your gun right at the point where you're going to be in a gunfight. And I think NIST has a very good article, or a very good term that they've coined. It's called PICKERL, the process of incident response. How you prepare all the way to lessons learned. So I think it's very critical to be proactive and have that level of preparedness. It shows maturity, right, in your cybersecurity program. So I love that you mentioned that point, because it's important for organizations as they mature their security program, right, uh, to respond to these types of incidents. It's critical for them to make sure that they have an updated IR plan, their disaster recovery, business continuity plans are all up to date. They're conducting tabletop exercises, they're doing penetration tests and things like that. So I think Young Brand, unfortunate, but I think it demonstrates their cyber capabilities in terms of responding to an incident.
Yeah, and I can't begin to tell you the amount of incidents that I have been involved with at the ground zero portion of it. And the first thing that I say is, have you enacted your breach response program? And they say, what is a breach response program? And it's heartbreaking. Like, it really is, for me, heartbreaking to see it. I kind of gave the analogy a couple of sessions ago where it's like a hurricane. A Cat 5 is bearing down towards the Gulf, and you're like, hey, activate your hurricane readiness program. And someone says, I don't have my hurricane readiness what is a hurricane readiness program? And that's important to have. So Richey, it's a great point that you said, because it does articulate that there was a plan there. And I would encourage everybody that's listening to this, if you are in charge of cybersecurity, or even if you're just in the industry, no matter what, incident response plan development, in my opinion, at least, and it's debatable, but that's the first thing you should have in place, because without that, the catastrophic damage on the back end could deem your company unrecoverable. To not have a plan, to have mass confusion when servers are beeping and your employees can't get into critical data, or if it's healthcare, you can't get into IoT or systems like that, and there's no plan of how to resume business as usual with that. So strong words of encouragement, either if you're on the side of encouraging people to do it, or if you are an actual professional in a company, start with something like this that's holistic, not just a technical plan, not just say, hey, we're going to drop Sentinel-1 or CrowdStrike in our environment and it's done. Have legal involved, have public relations involved. Again, this was a well-written article. You don't see the word breach in this article, which is huge. Breach is a legal word, not a technical word. And I was in a call one time, and it was right when the attack first happened, and the CEO was saying breach, breach, breach. And I said, sir, with all due respect, I'm stopping this call right now, because if you say this word breach and it gets out, you have started a timer on this incident to where you're going to have to report a breach in a certain amount of time. And we don't even know if data has been breached from the system. So we are stopping this call. We're getting a lawyer on. We're going to do it like that. So a holistic plan is vitally important.
Yeah, I know Jonathan's going to jump in, but
Yeah.
one thing I would add to that is, involve law enforcement before, right? Develop a relationship. That should be a part of your response plan. You should have I wouldn't say cozy relationship with law enforcement, but at least you should be familiar. They should know who you are. I think the CISO of Equifax, Jamil, I can't remember his last name, wrote a beautiful article about how he it took him like 124 hours to like stop something, because law enforcement saw something. They reached out to him. They were connected, and because of their relationship with law enforcement, he was able to, prevent a catastrophic incident from occurring. Jonathan, Mike's over to you. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I definitely love where this conversation has gone. And one thing I want to add is, as we talked about them having a plan, I think the big thing is, how are they exercising that plan, right? Are they actually doing, good tabletop exercises? Are they doing something beyond tabletop exercises? Because it's one thing to sit there and talk about, hey, this is what we should do if something happens, compared to, hey, we're going to actually do a simulation. We're going to take some, dummy data. We're going to do a simulation and see actually how we can respond to it. Right. As a, prior being an external auditor for both SOC 2 and ISO, 27001, both of those certifications and attestations talk about doing, IR plans, IR tests. Right. And it was funny to see sometimes, and you can see the maturity of some of the companies, that they would come in with kind of a very generic discussion. And here's a table talk that we did. It's like, and I would have to ask them, like, how does this apply to your business model, your business plan? Is this something that actually would happen? All right. So what I would encourage companies to do is based on what Yum did, it looks like they had a very good plan. They had a very good response exercises, so that way they probably knew what to do right away. Go back, just look at the type of vulnerabilities that might be very impactful for your company, and build plans around that, so that way not only plans but exercises. Do something more than tabletop. Bring some an expert in that can help do some type of simulation testing or anything to really test how good your cyber teams are, and not only involving them, but I think, as Paul said, bringing in your HR, bringing in your public relations, your legal, they're all a part of that IR plan, because you're going to be needing their expertise on how to get notifications out, how to deal with media when it comes to the eventual attack that could happen on your company.
Yeah, from an HR perspective, you're right. I was involved in one time, and an employee was taking a selfie next to their computer that had on it "Computer Sisters Down" because of cyber attack, and they were putting it on social media. And I went right to the boardroom. I'm like, you're gonna be shut down. Like, someone has to tell these employees, not to do that. And Chris, real quick, you mentioned law enforcement. Another one that I was involved in, they called in, and we said, whatever you do, do not call the media about this. Do not tell the media. And this is back in the day when people thought that that's what they do. 30 minutes later, we get a call from the media saying, hey, so and so was just breached. So they said the word breach too. We call them up, and we're like, what did you do? They're like, oh, we thought we had to call the media first. And we're like, so you mean to tell me if your house is burning down, you're going to call the local media to cover the burning house that you have, or you're going to call the fire department first? Like, just use logic. Just use logic here with that. In that, it, as you can tell, I'm pretty passionate about this domain of our industry. But yeah, it's crazy. It's
No,
really crazy.
I think it's funny because I was talking to someone who they were actually working with what's the gentleman's name? Krebs, Brian Krebs. So Krebs actually found out, speaking of the media, Krebs found out about I think it was Eddie Bauer, right? Krebs found out about Eddie Bauer. He actually told them, "Hey, this is coming," right? And they actually coordinated with Krebs to say, "Okay, basically, we're gonna, we're gonna conduct the response. We're gonna close out the incident, and then 20 minutes before Krebs delivers his message, we're gonna right." So the coordination was there. So even if you're working with media folks, you have to be very savvy. You have to be very thoughtful about how and when that information goes out, because timing is critical. If you're able to control that narrative, then you are in a better position of protecting your reputational, right, the reputational aspect, and in some cases legal. So we you have to think very carefully and be very thoughtful about how and when you involve the media if you choose to go that route. So absolutely 100% agree.
Those are definitely very important points that definitely requires a lot of structure, planning, as I mean, you have all been um, talking about so far, having that plan in place, going through all of these practices as it relates to the media. I mean, using the right terms. All of these things are very necessary. And based on this report, you can definitely see that they took the time to have all of the requisite personnel as part of their team in terms of having a structured plan to execute their recovery process. But I think in all of this is looking at the various ways that organizations can definitely, the level of safeguards that organizations can actually put in place to protect their data and to mitigate risk associated with ransomware. So, guys, can you, I mean, share further insights in terms of some of those? You might have mentioned some of those already. I mean, for sure, you definitely want to have that
Yeah.
robust security, I mean, controls in place. I mean, you cannot be overemphasized implementing strong security controls across the
Yeah.
organization's IT infrastructure, right?
Yeah. I think you're right, Rich. One of the, and I kind of alluded to this. I kind of rushed through when I was giving you my opening preamble. But one of the things I talked about was the industry-wide implications, right? You know, we one of the things that I think we're getting better at as an industry is sharing intelligence, sharing. When stuff happens, normally I remember like 10 years ago, things were happening, and if you had a breach or you had something happen, you would not tell anyone because you didn't want anyone to know for whatever reason. Now I think organizations are now coordinating, right? So you have a lot of FS, like financial services information sharing, and those committees, those organizations, the ISACs, right? You're seeing a lot of organizations now sharing information. In some cases, you have CISOs of competing organizations that are working together because the threats that they face, the vulnerabilities sometimes that they have, are very similar. And in sharing, with information sharing, um, it's kind of like the saying, a rising tide lifts all boats. So if someone is aware of something, they share that intelligence, which then benefits the industry on a whole. So I think, to that point, I definitely think the industry-wide implications is that hopefully we'll start to see more organizations share threat intelligence or threat feeds, whether it's coming from the likes of Recorded Future or any one of these other guys, but stuff that just may happen, right? I'm a part of a WhatsApp group, and we basically anytime we find something, we just dump it into WhatsApp, the chat group, because we know that it could be relevant to folks in the industry or their sector.
Yeah, in talking with somebody, the tools and the services that you get should automate your cybersecurity program. And let me unpack that for a couple seconds here. So we have a tendency in our industry to read a report and go to the top right. I'm not mentioning any names because I don't need a lawsuit on my hands. So use your imagination on the top right. But we go to top right and we're like, oh, MDR, XDR, SOAR, SIM. That looks like it's the best thing to do. I'm going to buy it. And then you buy all these tools, but it doesn't align with the program of the business, or the business doesn't even have a program. So when we are getting controls, when we are getting services, when we are getting tools, we have to look at it in the light of the cybersecurity program that we have to make sure that it fits, because there are SMBs running around with enterprise grade cybersecurity tools, and they're still getting impacted because they can't wrap their heads around it. It takes 2 FTE to run the tool. So I would encourage the group that's listening in here, that when you do put these controls in place, and yes, MDR, XDR sorts, like great tools and whatever, but don't chase the blinky shiny lights first. Do the hard work, go to the gym at 5:30 in the morning, write your policies, write your procedures, write your WISP. And then once you have that taken care of, align the tool set to make sure that the tools are just automating what you already have in process.
Yeah, that's a very valid point. I mean, tools in of themselves, and oftentimes this is one of the things that persons get caught up with. As I said before, the use of many tools, and we are not disputing the value of tools, applications. They do serve their purposes, but it's a matter of having a strategic plan and how it is that you actually use these various tools, the process, the people, the technology, that cannot be overemphasized. The synergy, the governance, all having that alignment in place is very critical. So, final words, guys, on this awesome conversation.
Yeah, no, around tools, I think, as you were talking about tools, I grew up in Jamaica, right? And a lot of times we would substitute like a rock for a hammer because we couldn't afford hammers, right? And we would just get a big rock and we would just drive the nail in. So you have to around tools. You have to be very careful, and I completely agree with you, Paul, 100%. That you have to contextualize, right? What does the business need call for, or what are you calling for? Because any shiny object out there may do the job, but it's having contextual information, having kind of a north star of what you're trying to get to that enables you to select the right tool.
Sure.
Yeah.
So,
And I
guys,
would say,
yeah, yeah, go ahead,
I was going to
Jonathan.
also add in, with the tools, make sure that you're securing it correctly, right? The other day was the first time I've actually gone into a fast food restaurant in a very, very long time. And they had those, self-serving monitors that you can just go up there. And I remember a few years ago, I seen a video of someone who was able to access, the command line by just kind of keep pushing against the bottom right.
Hmm.
So if you're a company that's automating, the customer service, make sure you're locking down, those features, those command lines, so that someone can't come in, somehow attack it from even right there in front of employees, right? So just pay attention to the tools that you have, but how are you securing those tools so that way, it's only those who are authorized to access it can do it.
That's a very valid point. I mean, you have actually opened up a different window in terms of a conversation. I pretty much would take that and go deep dive. I mean, based on what I've actually experienced in a similar situation, but I guess we'll leave that for possibly another discussion. I mean, so guys, definitely. I mean, I enjoyed your inputs, and as usual, guys, stay connected, stay in tune for our weekly cyber and GRC reviews. So, guys, have a wonderful rest of the until next week when we're back.
Take care, everybody.
Yeah.
Guys, take care.
Bye.
Bye.